So even though I said that certainly lots of people got lots of things wrong, and certainly, as we're going to talk about, the Clinton campaign got lots of things wrong, let me actually use here a really useful quote by Robbie Mook, who was the Clinton campaign manager. In a book that you're going to read in the program called Inside Campaigns that I did with my good friend Will Feltus, and you're also going to be taking a class from William and Matt Dollock, we interviewed Robbie Mook, who was the Clinton campaign manager in 2016. And when he was talking about the fundamentals of a campaign, he had this quote: "The campaign just becomes a bunch of questions you have to answer. And once you've answered the questions, you have to follow through on that answer." So, what are the questions? Well, 5 basic questions. Who are my targets? How am I going to reach them? What am I going to say to them? What's the other side doing? And how are we doing? So, in this program in general, not particularly in this course, but you are going to learn lots about how to define who your targets are. You're going to learn, when we talk about free media and paid media and targeting and the different ways that you reach voters, we're going to talk about how you reach them. When we talk about creating message and creating content, we're going to talk about what you say to them. We're also going to talk how important it is to realize that you have to know what the other side is doing as well. One big point to keep in mind, and I don't know how many of you played high school sports or high school football, that the play always works when the coaches draw it up on the chalkboard, right? Because it shows you how old I am when I say chalkboard. But it always works when the coach draws it up on the chalkboard or the whiteboard or the laptop. Why? Because the defense isn't moving. The other side isn't moving. And too often in politics, strategists or the candidate or the campaign will answer these questions: who are my targets? How am I going to reach them? What am I going to say to them? And it's static. But what they're not taking into account is the other side also has a strategy. The other side also gets to move its pieces. You're not the only side waging a campaign. You're not the only side getting to move your pieces. And lastly, consistent with that, it's important to continually assess how you're doing. Yeah, at the beginning of the campaign, you might make some calculations of who your targets are and what you're going to say to them and how you're going to reach them, but you also need to be monitoring what the other side is doing and monitoring how effective what you are doing is. Here's a much more complicated model of those 5 questions. And this political communications model is something that you're going to get into in a lot more detail in William Feltus's class on communication strategies and media buying. But that first block of targeting voter audiences is basically saying, who are your targets? And then you have messaging strategy about what you're going to say to them, and then you have a media strategy about exactly how you're going to target people, how you're going to touch them, whether it's through direct contact in person, whether it's by email, whether it's through the news media, and whether it's through paid media, either television advertising, radio advertising, or digital advertising.
A failed and corrupt political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people.
Everyday Americans need a champion, and I want to be that champion. So you can do more than just get by. You can get ahead and stay ahead.
So you'll see a lot more of this in subsequent classes, but it's just a lot more detailed model of the 5 questions. Those are the 5 fundamental questions. What's the real fundamental of elections? And this is going to sound maddeningly obvious, and it's always a wee bit embarrassing to have to admit this as a political scientist, that really our major finding as political science, after spending tens of millions of dollars on research and studying this and lots of very smart people looking at this, the major finding of political scientists is the earth-shattering point that Democrats vote for Democrats and Republicans vote for Republicans. Talk about that in a little bit more detail in other classes, but it's basically saying that people have partisan attachments that are akin to religious attachments or attachments to sporting teams. Most of their behavior, including voting, is driven by those attachments. So it's not that someone goes, you know, I like Barack Obama, he's a Democrat, I must be a Democrat. that the causality runs from, I'm a Democrat, Barack Obama's a Democrat, so I'm going to vote for Barack Obama. So my son just started school at USC, University of Southern California. I never really followed University of Southern California football. I probably would have mostly rooted against University of Southern California football for most of my life because they were always the big heavy going against some underdog. Now, boom, because he's going there, I have an attachment, I'm a fan, and that drives all of my attitudes and behavior. You can obviously see that when a favorite player of yours gets traded. You like the player when he was on your team, you hate the player now that he's on another team.
Back then, there was the television special that earned the scorn of the nation.
In this fall, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach and join the Miami Heat.
And broke hearts all over Cleveland.
This is terrible. This is the worst thing that could ever happen to Cleveland.
I hope he never wins anything in Miami.
So, akin to a sporting attachment, akin to a religious attachment, party ID is an attachment that drives issue attitudes and drives voting behavior. Seems pretty clear, seems pretty obvious. Let's try and make it an eensy bit smarter or an eensy bit more nuanced. So, yeah, it's the case that Democrats are going to vote for Democrats and Republicans are going to vote for Republicans, but a Democrat needs Democrats to come out. A Republican needs Republicans to come out. So turnout is very important. Yeah, Democrats are going to vote for a Democrat, Republicans are going to vote for a Republican, but much of what explains political outcomes is who actually comes out to vote, who turns out. Loyalty is also crucial, and we'll illustrate this in a couple of minutes. Yeah, Democrats are going to vote for Democrats and Republicans are going to vote for Republicans, but it depends if 92% of Republicans vote for the Republican or 97% of Republicans vote for the Republican. It depends if 87% of Democrats vote for the Democrat or 94% of Democrats vote for the Democrat. And also, even though I'm someone, and I think most of the folks who will be teaching you in this program think there are relatively few swing voters or independents, the behavior of independents or swing voters can also be decisive in a close election. So, combining the concepts of turnout and loyalty, we get to the core concept in this class of share and performance. So, instead of spending lots of time here defining share and performance, let me just explain it with a couple examples. There's a pretty big debate both in politics and in academia about which is more important. Is turnout more important, the share that you have of the electorate, or is it performance, how you do with the different groups that come out in the electorate? So, you have someone like Harry Enton, who used to be at 538, now I believe he's at CNN, who makes the argument that share is not as important, turnout's not as important. He says it's not what the electorate looks like, but the figures within the cells, how candidates perform among whites, blacks, young, old, etc. So he says it's performance. Someone like a Lynn Vavreck, who's a professor at UCLA, believes it's more about turnout and believes that talks about the myth of the swing voter, that there's no such thing as a swing voter, and the behavior of independents or swing voters is not decisive. Then you have someone like a Sasha Eisenberg, who's written some books and written in the media, and he says it's all about turnout and the composition of the electorate. So you have three different pundits or scholars here. One who says it's all about performance, one who completely dismisses the role of independents, and one who says it's all about turnout. Now, what's the truth? Is it fundamentals? Is it turnout? Is it performance? Is it independence? Well, the answer is yes. It's a combination of all three. And to understand election outcomes, you have to understand both share and performance. You'll learn about this more in another class or in other classes. We generally think that share and performance are driven by what's going on in the world. So the distribution of partisans in the electorate And then we think that the state of the economy, the state of the United States in the world, whether people think the country's going in the right direction, influence Democratic turnout, Republican turnout, Democratic loyalty, Republican loyalty. And only after we get to what the composition of the potential electorate is and these fundamental environmental factors do we get to how the campaign might shape share and performance.